Everybody, welcome back to the Goat Rodeo Podcast. I am joined by my two regular co-hosts, Simon Kuhn and Dave Cottle. Dave Cottle back from the wilds of moving his family interstate. You've survived, Dave. I'll just notice you've survived.
I did survive. However, I don't have the office set up, so I'm sorry your favorite guitar isn't behind me.
Just happy to have you back.
Bookshelves aren't full yet.
It is your wife's guitar. I'm just going to note that.
I know.
Yes,
I know
guitar.
your favorite guitar, your favorite virtue signal.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to figure out what to do back there now.
Garrett does love his virtue signals.
I do. I appreciate a good virtue signaling. Yeah, I do. Like, I don't know. One doesn't come to mind. Simon, what's a recent virtue signal you've seen?
I don't know. You're the only person in my life who regularly calls out the things I'm talking about as virtue signals. I'm like, damn it.
Because they are, or because they're not?
I think we're probably batting 50-50 if I had to guess.
Is that because of your political party affiliation? That's why I'm calling you
just because
out.
I have a political party affiliation, and it's the currency of the land. I don't think it matters which one you're in. It's just having one requires some level of signaling to the people what your virtues are.
Oh, sure. You don't need to have a strong party affiliation. You can vote either way in the generals.
Yeah, sure. But being party affiliated, I think automatically, like, you have to, part of the job is selling your product, right? And it's your idea.
That's true, but I don't think party affiliation is required to sell product.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of I don't know how much politics you want to talk, but there's been a lot of interesting Bernie Sanders interviews going around the realm right now as he does the circuit that have been pretty interesting dissections of the way the parties operate behind closed doors.
Sure. Bernie, every billionaire is a policy failure. Sanders, that guy?
That's the one.
Yeah. Going back half a topic, there have been some major political tribal affiliation virtue signals that actually have sold some product. And I'll just refer everybody to the 2015, 2016, 2017 Palmer Luckey, Facebook,
and so
Andorol.
And Musk just gave a speech, or Musk just got interviewed at a conference recently where he said, I have no intention of spending any more political dollars. And the response was, why is that? And he said, I think I've done enough. I'm not precluding myself, but right now I have no intention of spending more money in politics. I did what I wanted to do.
I mean, I don't know what the number is, but
many millions.
I think he committed verbally or otherwise something like $100 million.
Yeah, it's many millions. And also infrastructure, not just money, right? Because the PACs that he stood up were staffed by very capable CEOs of Hyperloop. I think became one of the executive directors of the PAC.
Sure, the Boring Company.
So yeah, there you go, Boring Company.
Okay. Did either of you guys sign up for and receive one of those Elon Musk checks for registering to vote? I think that was in Pennsylvania, Dave. Was that you? Did you get one of those sweet Elon Musk personal checks? No.
Is that what they did? I thought it was the rallies. Come to the rallies and you entered if you came to the rally, you entered some.
It was something. I think there was a creative kind of intermediate step that you entered a raffle, or I forget something, but I forget what it was exactly.
I should have. I voted, so I guess I should have gotten paid.
Why not pick
no
up
one actually got checks, for the record.
Is that true?
Yeah. There's some pretty recent reporting about whether or not checks actually went out.
Huh. I thought that was the whole thing, his super PAC or his PAC or whatever was cutting checks for registrations. I don't know. What do I know? I'm married to a deep blue Democrat, so I get that I get that filtration of current events.
I'll just say it was a very strange time for me to live in Pennsylvania.
But I mean, similar to our industry, right? I think the parties and the U.S. government, and we've talked a little bit about this, are going through a real shuffling of the decks.
Sure.
I think being a deep blue Democrat is going to mean something else. I actually saw one of Bernie's interviews that he was doing. They talked about this concept of threat to democracy. And someone said, well, from the way you're describing it, isn't the Democratic primary similarly rigged? And he's like, yep, I think it is. I was like,
you can always trust that Bernie will be appropriately spicy about even his own party.
Sure.
And it's probably because, he's actually more of an American socialist than he is a Democrat.
Yeah, he says that very openly, right? I'm not a Democrat. I caucus with him. But I think there's an interesting question here about antibodies, and it applies to us as well, is the ability to in a healthy way, integrate the antibodies of whatever you're doing, whether it's selling to the government or if it's defense tech innovation or if it's your political party. You either get your antibodies involved and like learn the healthy lessons that having antibodies, brings, or it like becomes really toxic.
Dave, I don't want to dox you, and I'm not gonna, but you you moved from Pennsylvania to, I'm just gonna say, somewhere in Michigan. Give me the top 3 reasons why this move happened, and you could anything between like the very somber, real, to the the fun reasons. There have to be some fun reasons, right?
Yeah. Okay. So if I'm giving you 3 reasons, number 1 is my mother-in-law is here. Number 2, my father-in-law is here to help with childcare for all of the too many small children that we.
They're not listening. You don't need to grease them up here.
Hey, my son's fishing.
Those are somber and fun.
My son's fishing on the boat with Papa, and Grandma's got the toddler, so life is good. Those are the 2 primary reasons we came up here.
Can I move to Michigan? I have a 1-year-old. Can we move to Michigan? Are they available for do they have capacity?
Absolutely not.
Tell them about the all in the next 5.
I've booked them out for the next 5 years, if not until the youngest one goes to college. Those are the 2 primary reasons, and then the third fun one is I married a Michigander, and she just believes that the way life should be led is covered in snow for 6 months a year. Snowmobiling and skiing and really leaning into winter sports.
As a Western Mountain person, I'll just note that it's not even good snow. Like she has grown up getting not even good snow.
How is it?
All snow.
How is it different snow?
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Dave. It's all the same and it's all bad.
Yeah, 2 idiot East Coasters. 2 idiot East Coasters here. Simon, defend yourself in that shirt, please. What does that say?
The shirt says sheer terror. It's got a great bulldog on it. It's a classic New York hardcore outfit from the 80s. It's still running today, actually.
And let me guess, you got that at the swag table at an illegal warehouse concert in Baltimore.
I don't think this one was illegal. Just a sheer terror merch table. If anyone out there is looking to get into sheer terror, the record is Ugly and Proud. That's the one you're going to want to start with. And
that's awesome.
Work your way around from there.
I love people who just own their thing.
Yeah, ugly people hardcore is my niche. If we're getting really into the subdivisions of the punk that I like punk for ugly people.
Ugly people hardcore. So yeah. I've known you for many years. This is the first time I've ever heard that phrase.
Yeah, because we don't often go into the subdivisions of my very niche subculture to begin with, but it's an interesting time.
I want to do a quick fact check. I don't know if this counts as a fact check, but producer Ian, drop a note here. We fact checked whether that Cher shirt that Simon had was actually as rare as he claimed. You can just buy that on Amazon, right? $13 online. Sorry, Simon. Sorry, dude.
I'm gonna need to see that link because mine has tour dates.
Oh snap! Yeah. Okay, all right.
Together.
The argument continues offline. Okay, guys, we're gonna use that. I don't know how we're gonna segue from that into the meaty topic of the day, but
Ugly and Proud, I think, is the segue.
Ugly and Proud. I mean, what we did want to talk about here is systems integrators. So Ugly and Proud, sure, yeah, that works. Yeah, that's a good
real trench digging of our industry.
Right. So I don't know where we want to start here, Simon. I think this was mostly like a you-driven offline topic from the past couple of days. Do you want to kick us off here?
The actual sort of way I wanted to start it was I wanted to talk about the recent 60 Minutes on Anduril, which I thought is a really interesting, may or may not be a watershed for the industry, but it's certainly an indicator of where this thing is going and like the level of cash that it has in the public consciousness. And
can I just say, I've got major like CEO jealousy things going on for Brian Schimpf, like well lit, warehouse, sexy autonomous fighter jet in the background, gets to walk around swaggering. I mean, I'm jealous.
And it's like some of the Anduril folks have talked about it. There was years. This was a target that they set specifically to get on 60 Minutes 5-6 years ago, and have been building towards it ever since, which I think is a really interesting way of thinking about what we do and how you can really supplant some of the historical titans in our industry. But offline, it had led us to this conversation around partnering. and specifically, partnering with primes has its own sort of connotation within the work that we do. But the more interesting version for me is partnering with the up and coming primes as we try to change the shape of this industry. And that led us ultimately to the meaty topic, which is systems integrators. Because a lot of times when you're partnering with a prime or an up and coming prime, what you're really doing is you're trying to integrate your capability into a bigger program of record, or just a bigger capability. Might just be like an urgent need for a specific theater. But very rarely, I think, are companies capable of building these 100% solutions to these really complex system-of-system problems. And
when can I interrupt? I'll be the straight man, kind of dumb question guy, because I play it much better than Dave, who can actually like wield intelligent questions. When we're talking about up and coming primes, we're talking about maybe two in particular, Anduril and Palantir.
Yeah.
And there are others, of course. I'm sure SpaceX at some level counts.
I'd say two that are brand new, which is where I think of Anduril and Palantir. I also think some of these
Palantir is not brand new, though.
Brand new compared to what the next one I was going to bring up, which is decades old. Because I do think folks like AeroVironment, which are traditionally thought of as mediums, are growing into these like prime or new prime positions. But AeroVironment's been around for many decades and is a company that's like transforming itself rather than like purpose building itself to be this like startup to neoprime.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Palantir and Anduril were super intentional, right?
I can be wrong. I think they're pushing 60 years old, AeroVironment.
Right. Exactly. So that's who we're thinking about. And like, but AV is a perfect example too, because AV does a lot of integration work now, right? They are acquiring companies and they are integrating other people's capabilities and the stuff that they're working on. And you see this across all kinds of different programs like the Titan that Palantir and Anduril and several others are participating in for the Army. For my sort of personal pet favorite in this like integration space, the LMATIS program, IMRIC program that take place over the Marine Corps. And so, the question that we sort of posed was, what does right look like in this system integrator place, and where do smaller companies fit in? Like, what's the best way for you to participate in these like system of system acquisitions? And I'm really interested to hear Dave's take, because my background is primarily government. I spent most of my time in the U.S. Senate, and then a little bit of time in the law firm world, and then now I'm in private industry. But from where I used to sit, I always wondered why DoD didn't take a stronger hand in just being the systems integrator, because I always thought there was a pretty perverse set of incentives once a company becomes an integrator for integration's sake, right? Like if your only goal as a company is to integrate other people's stuff together, I'm like, what is the purpose here? What's your incentive to do the best possible thing for the warfighter?
Oh man, so much to unpack there. Sorry, Gary, like you look like you're going to say something.
Well, I just want to ask maybe one more clarifying question. I feel like I should know the answer to this, but I don't. Anduril and CCA, it's one of two competitors for the CCA, the Collaborative Combat Aircraft. I think that's what it is, right?
Not two competitors, but two that's been selected for this first tranche, I believe. There's going to be follow-on tranches that could be other companies as well.
It was them and General Atomics. Are they actually system integrating this, or are they building everything in-house, Anduril? I know they acquired a company that had like the fundamental platform. It's called like.
So for those, I believe they're building.
Okay. And they're building
Yeah. And the CCAs are probably at like the bleeding edge of what a company could theoretically do themselves. I think if your system ever got even slightly more complex than that, and I think about it, what they're building for CCA is a piece of it. It's not even the entirety of that program, because there's going to have to be, integration with the manned platforms. There'll probably be multiple unmanned platforms that participate in it. So they have built a system that plugs in, but they're probably not even the.
So it could be the case, and I hopefully I'm not muddying the waters on this conversation, but it could be the case that Anduril is selected as not just like one of the final two, but actually successfully compete and get picked up as the program of record CCA. But they might in future not actually be the system integrator for the big system of systems play. It could be somebody else. It could be one of the legacy primes. It could be Gov. It could be somebody else. And
I'm not an expert on CCA either. It's a bit complex program that requires, I think, there's a lot of people spending their whole lives on CCA, right? Totally. Like it's enough all by itself.
Yep. All right. Sorry, Dave, that I walked all over you with that one.
No, all good. I think we might have to do this in chunks because I have a lot of thoughts on defense primes, especially legacy defense primes, and what I think where I think we should head next, or where I hope we're headed next. So first off, before I start throwing shade at a lot of folks that we know well in this community, like please don't take any of it personally. I will say, like, systems integration is necessary and it's not easy, right? So like there is a role for primes or systems integrators, whether it's the United States government or whether it's legacy or future defense prime contractors. It's necessary and not easy. Compliance also, in our current policy environment, compliance is also necessary and not easy. So I fully recognize that there is a role for both of those things here. And especially, in defense tech startup land, like contracts aren't always immediately accessible, right? So by going to a defense prime or traditional defense prime, you get a systems integrator, you get somebody that understands, they can navigate compliance, which is really complex, and they typically have contracts that are immediately actionable. That's the reason that we all, knock on doors of defense primes when we start up a new thing. However, there's some really sticky challenges. And Simon said an important word, which is incentives, and there's incentives being typically misaligned. So the way the reveal works, I am incentivized to get my product to the field as fast as possible, solve a warfighter problem, generate revenue, and then go back to building more products. Like, I don't want to sell my engineering hours. I don't want to sell our very good engineers and their time and burden them with complaints. We want to predict what the next thing is the warfighter will need. We want to build that product, and then we want to get it in the hands of the warfighter and sell it to the United States government.
Quick interrupt.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Dave. Just quick interrupt. Many companies build very successful businesses selling engineering capacity and capability. And those are engineering services firms, or that engineering services component comprises one of many business lines of business within a successful business. We have chosen not to pursue that as a line of business. We could, and we know plenty of companies. We work with plenty of companies that have a large, growing, even dominant engineering services component to their business offering. We've chosen not to do that because we believe that our place in the industry, and this is driven by the incentives of being a venture-backed company, is to develop high-margin software capability and sell that with as little COGS and other input costs as we possibly can. So anyway, I just want to make sure that that's a distinction. We're actually not casting shade at engineering services companies either, because that has its place in the industry. But many venture-backed companies like ours need to be very aware of and even guarded against the idea of what I always refer to as something like scope or mission creep for the company, which is it's much easier to go and pursue a labor contract that allows you to sell a bunch of engineering hours. It's much easier than building a product that sells at scale. But that challenges where the value is for a company like ours. All right,
it's the difference of thinking of your company as a product company versus
totally right.
Something else. Right?
That's right.
That's a part of the 60 Minutes piece on Anduril.
100%.
Is thinking of this as products.
That's right. Yeah. Even though I'll note, Anduril's got like an incredibly huge.
Well, I think we're going there, right? Yeah. Like, I think that's where this goes, and that's where I really want to have this conversation at the end. But I want to let Dave. Sorry.
Yeah. So you're right. Well, you're both right, but Garrett, the larger the company gets, right, the more it trends towards a traditional defense prime, the more it matches what's easy or the preferences of the United States government or the policy, the more that features in their business, right? Yeah. So the more engineering services features, even if as they try to build or pursue programs of record or not, what they're incentivized to do is go after the largest and longest engineering services contracts.
Right.
So if you're a small that's trying to partner with a big, and they're going after this huge body of work over many years, like, it's misaligned incentives to try to get your product into that system, especially in a way that you retain your intellectual property, because they are attempting to build GPR that the government will own and then wholly own, 5 years or or whatever. And we, as a venture-backed company, are trying to retain IP so that we can retain the IP and sell our products. So that becomes real sticky. There are a few examples of it working really well. And we can probably get to some of those. But for the most part, when the first frustrating conversation we have with a defense prime, or in any startup will have a defense prime, is, hey, I've got this thing, and the prime says, hey, this thing is great, and it probably really meets some of the sub requirements of the thing that I'm going after. However, what's the square footage of your facilities? How many engineering hours can you give me? And please tell me that your intellectual property assertions sheet is like a paragraph long.
Right.
So I want to flag one thing that you mentioned, which one of the smartest humans I've ever known, who used to work at a large defense prime, told me. It's that there is an invisible pull built into the way financial incentives work in DoD contracting that will slowly transform your company to look like your customer.
Mm-hmm.
Always. Like it is a constant sort of like watering to keep yourself from just looking like the thing the DoD asks for with the easy button. So even as I think a lot of us are building product companies, we're going to have to constantly be thinking about, am I slowly turning into the DoD in order to like make this major or contracting officer happy with me? Because I want them to be happy with me because I want them to buy my product. But like, is it insidiously changing the shape of my company?
I really hope we don't start sending our line business development executives to professional military education and
would you trade it for 60 minutes?
So, well, since I started this with, there's a need, right? The role has to exist. Systems integration isn't going away, and compliance, like some version of compliance, although it might be less burdensome, is not going away. And somebody's going to have to manage contracts and all of that. There's a role for all of that. I actually prefer when the government acts as the integrator, or at least the initial integrator, and then turns it over to a prime for sustainment and spare parts and FSRs and stuff later. I feel like the problem with that is it requires a large team, talented, experienced, and they're not always staffed or resourced to do that. So what ends up happening is like we grow to look like our customer, in the sense that, we're the easy, the defense prime is the easy button for the customer to say, here's all the 10 requirements. You figure out the subcontractors that are appropriate, or the team that is appropriate to meet all those requirements and manage them. But that prime contractor has misaligned incentives for what those subs have, which, isn't great for the subs. It's a lot better if the government determines the pieces of that major program and what they're going to be, and act as the integrator to make them all work together and meet sort of each company where they're at, even if we turn it over to a defense prime later. But it's rare that I see them staffed or resourced or have the deep bench of talent required to do that.
So my counterpoint,
totally ignorant question, Dave. Our experience with PE Soldier, some of that integration work happens with a defense prime contractor. Some of it is at the SIL in New Jersey. Is that an example of one of Reveal's engagements with a gov side system integrator, or am I reviewing that incorrectly?
Yeah, sort of. That's an example. In that case, those are essentially CETA employees, right? Science, engineering, technology. Those are CETA folks. So they're really, if you have an integrator role, or a role like they have in the software integration lab, where you're ensuring that the software can go live on the network and touch other things and integrate with the larger system, and you don't have true badged government people to do that work, then you contract it out to a CETA organization, and they're effectively representing the United States government. However, the incentives of the full-time government people are different than the people that are fulfilling that contract, even if they're both representing the United States government. Right?
We've noticed.
That company has to. That company is incentivized to realize their own margins, and to recompete and win that contract.
That's right.
They're not necessarily exactly aligned with the incentives of the program office.
Right.
So I think I generally agree that I like the government doing it, but I don't agree that the government needs to have large teams in order to do it. I think we need to shift, and have to some extent shift our thinking around how these programs should be set up in order to make it easier for them to integrate. And part of that is PEOs that should be thinking about being integrators instead of being developers. I think there's a huge historical body of work in the government developing things, which I don't think is productive. I think the private sector is better at developing capability and has better incentives to develop those capabilities. So if the government put more of its resources towards being the integrator and being, that line to the end user, and making sure that their voices are heard, they could spend a lot less resources on developing and having science projects that are like kicking off in parallel, which eat up a ton of attention. It's not even that it matters if they're good or bad. If the guy sitting knee to knee with you is building a thing that's a competitor to a thing you were in the middle of buying, it becomes slow and cumbersome.
It's hard for me to separate integration from. It's hard for me to completely separate integration from development, though, because if I make tracking systems and you make high-powered lasers, and the requirement of the United States government is a counter UAS system that can detect, track, and interdict, and so they need both of our things. It is unlikely that your thing and my thing completely fit that.
So this is what the government,
then they'd be best in class.
Specifically, what the government should be doing then is telling them, hey, your thing needs to talk to. It's modular systems open architecture, right? It's your things need to be able to talk. The actual requirement here is that I need a radar that can do X, Y, and Z, and it needs to be able to talk to everything else that I might stick on it. And so, like, my favorite example of the government doing this is a Marine Corps program called LMATIS. And there's a program manager there named Don Kelly. I think he's awesome. He's done a lot of cool work. I've watched him demo some stuff before.
Do you think he's listening to this podcast?
You can Google him pretty easily and like find the different programs he's worked on, because he does interviews. He talks about it a lot. But the LMATIS, for example, is a counter drone system on a Polaris with an operating system, a computer, a radar, and a gimbal, all from different companies. And the Marine Corps looks at them and goes, if you want to compete here, your component has to talk to everything. But at any moment, I can rip your component off because the Marines tell me they want a different one, and I'll recompete just that component. But Don Kelly is like, this is all I do. I don't develop anything. I just make demands of industry. And I think industry can meet those challenges if there's like the realistic opportunity to make money.
But you're proving my point. He is acting as the integrator.
Yeah, totally.
It's like he doesn't intend to add, if I recall correctly, he doesn't intend to add a prime to that equation at all until it's time for sustainment. Like life cycle sustainment and spare parts, and like, okay,
he has abandoned and publicly abandoned development, which I think is one of the roadblocks that a lot of PEOs have, is they kind of still have these vestigial development arms and relationships. And if the challenge is resourcing, then kill your development wings and lean into commercial solutions.
I gotta think that sometimes the gov will stand up or maintain some amount of like dev capacity internally as a pricing pressure on the private vendors, right? We see this with small drone vendors, right? Every lab across the U.S. government has like a 3D printing shop and a team of specialists in the background who, they could build you a small FPV drone next week, unless you give me a better price, right? I mean, and I'm not saying I'm not citing any specific conversation that I am privy to, but I could understand that being one of those, negotiating levers that the gov would want to maintain. Like, hey, we could do this on our own.
But they only do it with stuff that is like easy to wrap your head around, right? Like, there's nowhere in the government that's building radars.
You're right.
Because they just wouldn't, like, how dare you? So they'll pull that out sometimes. They'd be like, well, we could build this for X, Y, and Z. I'm like, you would never do that if this was a radar. What makes you think you're going to go build a better X, Y, or Z widget? You're not going to. It's not going to happen.
Right. And certainly not with like the next generation of 21st century technologies.
No, the government's better off saying, hey, you build me a better one, or I'm going to go to your 15 competitors.
That's right.
And give them a shot, because I bet you they build it cheaper.
Yeah.
But Simon's example is basically like, it's unique, but it's what I consider optimal. The United States government says, here are the 5 requirements. I'm going to select the best in class 5 components. And I'm going to make them work together or use the same architecture. And then I will select a prime after I've selected all the key components. What would typically happen?
They are, though. I think that I've seen this with a couple where they've tried to select a sustainment prime and it kind of goes off the rails, because I think there's a real incentive mismatch where if the government throughout the whole like urgent need process did all these crazy components, was hot swapping and like built it purpose built, when you switch to program of record, if you think you're going to lay a prime on top of it and you're going to be able to maintain that level of like agility, you're not. And I've seen those primes, like contracts, get ripped away by some of these forward-thinking program offices. I'm not sure what the solution is. I actually don't know the answer to the sustainment problem.
There are only two things you can do. You can contract a systems integrator, sustainer to do it, or you can, hire more govvies to manage it with more experienced govvies. That's it. It's a lot. Yeah. It's a ton. Like, okay, we got a better tire from this vendor and it's cheaper, and we got to make sure it clears the wheel well. And, if we're going to rip and replace one of those modular components, as you put it. But regardless, my point is, like, if they select the 5 key critical components that maybe come from proven technologies or smaller companies or whatever, as opposed to having the defense prime do it themselves. Because unfortunately, I think that's what usually happens. Here are my 10 requirements. Primes compete for it, and they say, we will go find all of the best in class components of this. And the way they're incentivized is not necessarily always to find the best in class components.
Yeah, no, they're not going to go find best. They're going to find the best bang for their contractor buck.
They're going to would. Yes, first and foremost, what do we have in house that can meet as many of these requirements as possible? Not best, but ours.
And then what can we bring in house? What's economically worth it to bring in house? What needs to be a partnership? And like when I'm finally at the bitter end, well, I'm like, okay, I'll pay you to do it.
And who will make it easy for GPR and compliance purposes?
Mm-hmm. There are so many like bespoke government technology solutions, right? Like that has a market of just the DoD as an example, where like you can't actually go out and find and source commercial solutions like that exists. Like CCA is an example, to go back to the Anduril thing, right? Like, Dave, I know that Michigan airspace is pretty permissive, but you still couldn't like buy and fly your own CCA out there.
But they did solicit the market though, like, right? I mean, like, people built to their requirement.
Totally. But what I'm saying is, you're not just going to be able to go out and like hotspot. It's not the same as tires, as an example, or like some other like truly dual use kind of or purely commercial capability, right? And so you then get into the stickiness of having like at the end of the day, you really only have like 2 or 3 vendors who made it through your vetting and selection process who could potentially satisfy some of the systems integration, major components or subcomponent, elements in your program. And so then you're stuck in a quasi vendor lock scenario. And I mean, that's where the stickiness is for program managers and acquisition professionals, trying to maintain a competitive enough environment so they get like not only best in class, but a good price for it over the life cycle of a program without getting stultified and vendor locked.
Things like CCA are really rare, right? Because it's in that perfect wave band where it's big enough that it needs to be purpose built, but it's not big enough like a submarine where it's just chocked full of components that no entity could ever wholly develop in-house, and you have to bring stuff in.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a huge money band, but it's a pretty small like program office band. Because I would argue things like LMATIS, counter drone systems, UAS systems, all that stuff are fairly easy from a bandwidth perspective to program manage internal to the government. It's like I refuse to believe that the bureaucratic burden for an FPV drone capability of record is as burdensome as building the world's first autonomous fighter jet, right? Like, it's a different.
Yeah, difference in kind, difference in category. But I mean, like, reference the thing that we've cited a bunch of times on this pod, but shipbuilding capacity and stuff. Like, almost nobody does that. Why? Because the government has layered on not just a bunch of like policy and law and other things. Jones Act is one of those hobby horses Simon and I beat on.
That's even big. Like, that's bigger than DoD, right? Like,
way bigger than DoD.
But DoD couldn't even solve that if they wanted to.
But DoD and the Department of the Navy do maintain the only relationships with shipyards that could possibly build, a military vessel. And so, and the resulting lack of capacity, lack of creativity, lack of supply chain there is because of that multi-decade vendor lock thing that, again, is much bigger than DoD, but that's maybe an extreme example of the thing that we're poking at right now.
Yeah. So unless I'm actually optimistic here. I think that not only do we have a new age of primes coming about, I think we also have some legacy primes that are recognize the writing is on the wall and acting a bit differently. If we're, if we're talking about success stories, we had an episode where y'all were talking about Blue Halo, and recent growth and success, right? I don't intimately understand the inner workings of the program, but from an outsider's perspective, watching Blue Halo's rise, I think one of the critical stepping stones there was their work for Cord, for KBR on MSHORAD. So, and that was, I think, when we're talking about defense tech startups working with primes, KBR is as prime as legacy prime as it comes, right? This is $600 billion contractor or something. So you've got Blue Halo that goes to work with Cord and KBR to develop MSHORAD. From my perspective, it looked like Blue Halo basically took their Locust product, their target and tracking product, used Cord and KBR for compliance, systems integration, the other contractors, but they negotiated upfront the retention of their IP, and that's still a product that's in their portfolio. And MSHORAD, directed energy MSHORAD is now a product. So it does look like it can work and help a defense tech startup meaningfully grow and scale.
I have huge admiration for CEO Wahid Nawabi, just on a personal level, but also it cannot be easy to rebrand, recreate, reimagine, reconfigure a nearly 60-year-old defense prime contractor like AeroVironment, which I'm reminded by my language model AI assistant here on my desktop that following the completion of the acquisition of Blue Halo, which was in excess of $4 billion, they've actually rebranded the company. They no longer call themselves AeroVironment. They're actually AV only, which, people have been calling them that for a long time. But sorry, AV team, I was misnaming you or whatever is the term of art.
I think AV is one of the most interesting sort of like case studies in a larger company trying to change themselves and being pretty successful as our industry changes. I don't know of anyone that's quite that size or larger that seems to be doing as much work to be running as fast as some of these other much smaller and nimble. The smaller your organization is, the more agile you're going to be. That's just like the nature of bureaucracies. So I think AV's ability to kind of like run fast and rebrand and chase after some pretty innovative capability development is really fascinating.
Time will tell. I know the upstart community got pretty activated and frothy when they were the recipient of the major Replicator 1 contract through DIU, which we've talked about plenty of times here on this podcast. And it's for a technology that I think is variably operable in the target geography.
But here's the thing, that's a common thread for all of these technologies. I mean, Military Times did a big article on drones in Europe and how everyone's drones failed to fly.
Yep.
These are challenging environments, and there's a real chicken or the egg question. And I think it's probably no small part of the calculus for folks like Saronic and Anduril to just dump a bunch of VC money into building factories now. Because when the DoD lumbers its way towards, okay, I want to buy at scale, they're not going to give you time to build a factory. They're going to award to whoever's got a factory right now, regardless of who's got the best capability. They're just going to be like, who can build it right now.
It is kind of too bad that we took a big swing, and knowing in advance that those aircraft didn't operate to perfection in the target environment, we spent $70,000 per on thousands of them.
It's purely economic incentives. Everyone in that chain has to report that physical things appeared for the money spent, and who can give me physical things for the money spent. And that becomes it. Like you get into your own lizard brain. Like, I have to produce something.
I'm gonna misquote Milton Friedman here. So give me some generosity on the paraphrase. But
we all love Milty.
Do you really? You, Simon Kuhn, love Milton Friedman. Okay,
yeah.
Great.
No,
we can talk about it. But he said something like, the only way to measure policy is by its impact, not its intentions. And I think going back to Dave's earlier comment in the conversation around incentives, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. That's we quoted that last week, Charlie Munger. I think those two things are mismanaged at the middle layers of the acquisitions bureaucracy. In other words, the middle layers are measured on whether they can just pump money through a contract and whether they can meet all the certification, authorization, compliance requirements, check the legal boxes. And it doesn't actually matter whether the impact is right or not, right? And so I think it's the unfortunate reality is that Replicator 1 was simply proving, and this is how they were measured, proving that they could pump a bunch of resource and money through pipes, right? They wanted to lay the pipes, they wanted to prove the plumbing, they wanted to make sure all the seals were in and all the, but the intended impact, at least to the street, was, are we making combat more effective in Ukraine? And are we inspiring the upstart community? That's what we thought that the intended impact was, and that I don't think was the case at all. And it was poorly communicated. And everybody looked at DIU, the front door for the innovation ecosystem, and they watch multiple hundreds of millions of dollars of contract work going to a legacy prime contractor. That's pretty disheartening. And that's not to cash in at AeroVironment. They did everything they possibly could to win in the market, and kudos to them and all of that. But I do think it's an incentives and it's like an incentives and impact question in my mind, not an intention thing.
I think we're taking the wrong lesson out of Replicator. And I think if you look at Replicator and you're disheartened, pack up your stuff and go home, because you're not built for this. And I think about the big Google walkout, right? And tons of employees walked out of Google because they didn't want to do work with the Department of Defense. And an entire industry of folks stood up and said, oh, I do. I'm going to go start a company. I'm going to get after it.
Yeah.
And so if you look at Replicator and you think, man, they're just not capable of doing it, that's not a big swing. $1 billion is not a big swing. It is a trial balloon. You look at the $150 billion in reconciliation, 40 of it goes to shipbuilding. So when there's $40 billion towards attritable drones, then I'll be like, yeah, we're taking some swings. One is a test. And I think the really serious players, and I count Anduril and Saronic among them, look at that test and go, okay, here's my lesson. I need to have a factory, and I need to be able to crank stuff out so that when they swing again, hopefully bigger and better, I'm positioned. Because clearly I wasn't positioned well enough, and AV stole my lunch. And I think that's great. I mean, I think that we talk about that outcome. The outcome of DoD trying $1 billion should be an industry going, cool, there's an appetite to spend the money, but they need better stuff to buy, and they need it at scale if we're going to be like serious winners. And I think it's just, like I said, I think we're taking the wrong lesson. I think it's a really encouraging one. I think it just means we need to have factories built.
That's why I think I agree with you, Simon. And that's why a moment ago I said this was a communications and marketing or messaging problem.
But they have to talk about it that way, right? Like in order to fit in the policy structure of what the admin was doing at the time and like all those things.
But that is like an unnecessary tease and yanking out of the rug underneath the innovation ecosystem's feet, right? Like they thought this was going to benefit the non-traditional small players in the drone industry, and it absolutely didn't. Even like a minor signal, even a sliver of that $1 billion, right? Even a sliver of that would have served the purpose of continued inspiration and continued voting from the innovation and risk capital ecosystems to continue playing. And you know what? None of that stopped, right? Like people are still chasing these contracts. And I think it's because of the thing you just said. The lessons they've learned is that scale, manufacturability, supply chain, all of those things matter more in the long run to large acquisition program managers. Okay. Let's wrap and give Dave the final word. Go for it, Dave.
Yeah, I actually agree with both of you here. I didn't get to argue with anybody today.
I could start a fight real quick though. Do you want me to start a fight real quick?
No, I think it's good. We gotta have one episode where we're not fighting with each other. I think that I'd like to see clear communication either in the form of contracts and contract flow, or just plain language that incentivizes firms like ours what they should really want us to do. They being the procuring authorities in the United States government, is invest meaningfully in maturing technologies, so TRL, maturing manufacturing and material readiness and capabilities, MRL, and testing it and integrating it with all their other stuff to make sure that it works, so that they have a 90% solution when we are going to really decide to buy and scale a capability. It's always those three. I realize I'm nerding out on acquisition lingo again. You guys always roll your eyes a bit, but it is TRL, MRL, and IRL. If I were in the United States government, the current policy environment, I would say, bring me your highest TRL, MRL, and IRL capabilities. And these are the opportunities that have coming down the pipe, and what I'm going to do about them to incentivize you to make your own investments against those three key areas so we can get work done.
You're right. That was nerdy, but that's why we love you, Dave. That's why we love you. You're an acquisitions nerd, and
So happy to have you back.
And you bring home the bacon, as they say. I'm happy to have you back. And you're creeping west, right? Like, I live out here in Montana. You used to be in Pennsylvania. You're moving incrementally farther west, and
Finally in bad snow territory. Thank God.
I don't think I'm as far. I've crept a little bit west. I crept pretty far north. Still not as far as you, though. In Michigan, the top of Michigan, the northing still isn't. It's still not as far north as Montana, right?
No, but you're in the northern tier now. That's what matters.
I will admit that I don't know.
I don't know.
We're comparable. I think we're comparable latitude.
That's what it would look like on a flat map. I'm curious what it would look like on a globe.
Montana is more north than like 50% of Canada's population. So my guess,
because they have that. That's because they have those weird, like south of much of the U.S. border cities. Like, and anyway, I'm going to betray deep ignorance of Canadian geography if I say anything more. So
I'm at the bleeding edge of my geographic knowledge.
I'm going to stop. Okay, guys, thanks for a rousing conversation. For those out there listening or viewing or watching, please follow us, subscribe, leave comments, and we're looking forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you next week.
It's in Rippets.
Thank you, Rippets. Always Rippets. Waiting for that sponsorship. All right, out.